Welcome to another episode of All Things Conflict with me, your host, Maria Harper. Who else? And today I'm really excited to share a conversation with a very dear friend of mine, Fiona Ruttle. Now, in life, there are some people who just quietly go about their business. They don't look for accolades or praise or try to put their names forward anywhere. And they just quietly learn, get on with, help, support, and grow. And Fiona's one of those people. And I'm just excited to bring out some of the work that she's done from a mother and the work she does at home in her personal learning through to her work in prisons and her work as a mediator, helping the local community. We've known each other several years, and it is a joy to share this conversation. Welcome. Fiona, welcome to All Things Conflict. I can't believe we're doing this. We have shared so much together, and the idea that we're sharing our conversation just really fills me with joy. And I'm going to ask you to kind of introduce yourself, but I am going to start off by saying, we sort of knew each other, and then you had this kind of crazy idea that I needed to bring this work into prisons. And that was in 2009, would you believe?
Goodness.
And so it's all your fault. So let's start there. But if you could introduce yourself.
So I think when I was 39, I went into a prison to help on the chaplaincy team.
I was going to say, not as a guest of Her Majesty.
No, and I came out about 12 years later. And that was, it was a profound time. And I realized that there is no division. There is no, people seem to think that people who have been in prison are a breed apart in some way. There's some sort of segregation. And I found some of the most easy and good relationships in there, and honest ones too, which is a funny thing to say about prison. And yes, I invited you to come in and deliver your DRM. And I think that was the point at which I was changed. I was transformed by that myself. And I think those people in that room were too. What happened was that, Maria, some miracle magic you waved to get the VP unit prisoners, that's the vulnerable persons unit, people who have often been convicted of sex offences, along with the mains wing prisoners. And that never happens in the prison, not in that prison. And for the first 4 days of the 10 days, they segregated themselves, I think.
Mm. So if I remember, because it was a room with no windows, and I'd never worked in a prison before, and so I couldn't understand why one group of people were coming in from that door and another were coming in from that door, and then we were in this room with no windows.
It was exactly that.
Yeah. And they were sort of sitting there and they were sitting there, yeah.
And what happened, I think, on about day 5 was the work that we'd all been doing together. They had the space to listen to one another, to connect with each other, to understand about needs and feelings. And there was a humanization. So no longer were people monsters. They were people who were just like each other. And then that segregation broke up and we were sitting amongst each other. And there was a real respect that went on after that. And what I came out was thinking, this isn't rocket science. Why isn't this done more? Why don't we go for the basics? Why don't we get taught this kind of connection and conversation in our homes, in our schools? I had a very bad role model, really, in my own home for conflict. And I think we've mentioned this before, but my mum, who is brilliant at many, many things, did not teach me well about conflict. And I remember a couple of friends who, I don't know what even went wrong, but she cut them off and she never had a conversation and they never knew what had gone wrong. So I was quite terrified about conflict and arguments because I thought that it might mean the end of a friendship. And that was where I came from, that place to the prison, and I saw a different way of doing conversation and connection. And honestly, Maria, that was transformative because suddenly I had a safe place to go with conflict. I'd never had a safe place. It was make it up as you go along. And you'd be sucked down into this awful vortex of help. It's all going wrong. The alarm bells are going off in my head. The conversation, the argument has become about something different from how we started. I don't know where it's going. It's getting worse. And I don't know where it's going to end. And so I had a terror of that sort of conversation, Maria.
And I think what really resonated for me was you talking about the role models that we have, and your mum's capacity to just cut people off, which actually my mum had too. I mean, my mum would have the big fight and then she had relatives that she refused to speak to. It didn't matter, even if the situation changed, she was so resolute. And so I think that maybe we didn't know that about each other on any conscious level.
No, we didn't.
But the same thing applied. That for me, conflict was a win or lose, do or die. It will always take you to a worse place. And I think that for me, it was about how do we make conflict into something that takes us to a better place? Is it something we could travel through?
Yes.
And I think that's been your journey, hasn't it?
Having a kind of framework to fall back on with the dialogue roadmap, the nonviolent communication, has been absolutely key to taking away the terror. It's never, ever happy going into a conflict. There's always anxiety. We don't want to do it, most of us. But now there are alternatives and there are safe places to go. And even if you don't get there on the first conversation, you've got another option. You've got a second conversation possible, usually. And so that's really reassuring for me, and it has changed so much. And I look back to when I first met my husband, Stephen, and one of the first things he said to me was, well, of course, relationship is more important than the argument. And I thought, I've never heard that before, and it's certainly not seen it in practice. But we're talking about justice. I'm going to just go on a little segue here. It's interesting how he, as a QC and as a litigator, a barrister, then went into the mediation world, and he does the same cases, but he mediates them. And I think very often in the courts, people come for a particular thing. They want fairness, they want to be heard, they want to be understood, and they want the judge to agree with them.
Yes.
But there are two people on opposite sides wanting those same things, so where do you go? And what happens is the focus is on the problem. And the lawyers will focus on the problem. And very often the people get left on the edges. And so what they come away with is probably not the fairness, the conversation, the connection, the understanding that they were hoping for, but a decision which sometimes wrecks lives.
Absolutely. And so even in its best case scenario, you may have resolved the dispute, but the conflict lives on.
Absolutely. And that's the different element. So when you're in a room, in a facilitated conversation, you have the chance to engage with the bit of the other person. You may not agree with them, and we're not talking about agreement here, but engage and be heard by the other person. And I suppose that's the key to so much. I think creating the space for listening. And so I have a an idea about this listening as the different place I go to now. It's not natural when you're having when you're in conflict with somebody, whatever sort of degree of that there is. The last thing you want to do is go and listen to them. It's the anti-thing of everything in your body that screams out, I want to be heard. I want them to understand me.
But they're saying the same thing.
Exactly.
And so in my sort of system, in my world, on my planet, the way I talk about this is the person with the least amount of awareness has to be allowed to go first.
Yeah.
And the person with the most awareness has to step back and let the other go first.
And I love that. And I would say that going to listen or allowing the person to speak first is an act of love. And it's alien, as I said, to where we're going normally, but actually it's a discipline too, to choose to do that. And I have a story, and I've told this to a few people, but it's something that's really relevant for me. And it involved one of our kids. They were just back from a gap year, and we had fallen out over a particular thing. So badly that he got out of the car and walked home, not very far, I would add, and went from room to room, avoiding me. And eventually I said, look, I just want to hear what you have to say, and I want to listen. Would you be willing to tell me what's happening for you? So he said, all right then. And you know, for the first time, I think as a mum, I zipped my mouth and I said, this is what I've heard you say. And, you know, whether it was nice or nasty, whether it was things that terrible things he was thinking about me, I just kept respectfully, this isn't a technique. It is an act of gift and love. And people will sense that. So when I was inviting him to carry on for about 20 minutes, and in that time, something transformed. And I said to him, have I heard, is there anything else you want me to hear? And he said, no, I think that's about it. So I said, would you be willing to listen to me? And he said, yes. Now, he didn't even want to be in the same room as me half an hour before. And now he was willing to listen. And that dynamic is extraordinary. And it's so simple, but something we don't use out there in the world very often.
Well, I think what I'm most touched by, and the reason that it had such a profound effect in that instance and probably other instances, is because you're saying it's not a technique. It's not something where I'm sitting there thinking, oh, how can I manipulate this person? I know, I'll do a bit of listening, you know. It's actually, you know, I talk it about going into the state of receiving. So in this part, you know, my job is to build a safe container in a world where conflict is not really safe. So we're always starting from fear and trepidation and, you know, sometimes spinning out on what could go wrong or how I'm going to punish this, but whatever's going on, you know, that's not the usual thing. So the job is to lay the groundwork, lay some foundations, and then create a safe container. And that starts by being on receive. You know, I always think of the dishwashers when it's on receive and you're just putting loads and loads of stuff in it, you know. And so, you know, that is an act of love. It has got nothing to do with technique.
But it's something we can learn to do.
Yes. Well, I always talk about this as, you know, if what I was doing was giving piano lessons and you came back week after week and you hadn't lifted the lid on the piano and practiced, well, you wouldn't get very far. So these things are things we have to try. And then the way I talk about this is we try them first in low risk situations.
Yes.
Just see what it's like to listen to the woman on the checkout as she's ringing up the goods at the supermarket, you know, if you're not doing online shopping as we all are now. But
absolutely agree. And it grows. So this has been about 15 years that I've been trying to practice this differently. And it becomes part of your life in a different way. And I find myself responding differently. Not always. I'm still, I can still crash into a bad situation in an argument.
Yeah,
in fact, Maria, would you mind terribly if I but it was a very good quote. when I think you were having a conflict in your home and one of your kids flung at you, but you're meant to be a peacemaker.
Yes, exactly.
And you said,
yes.
but today I'm a participant.
Yes. Yes, well, that often happens, like I'm not allowed to ever get annoyed or be triggered by things. And I'm like, well, sometimes I'm the person that starts the fight.
But it is that thing, there's an awareness, you're wearing different hats, aren't you?
Yes.
And you have to be authentic, and you have to, have those moments when you're allowed to have a little bit of free rein, but mindful of the second conversation, I suppose.
I think there are a couple of things coming out of this for me. And the first one is, yes, we are, we've all been trained that way. We talk about the role models don't just disappear. We can minimize them, and we can kind of, push one thing back and one thing forward. And yet there will always be something that will come and bite us on the bum, and set us off. But for me, the difference is that when I was in that kind of win or lose, fight or flight, debating model, then there was an intention to overpower the other, even if it was just to get them to concede, right? This time it's the venting and letting off of steam with no intention to harm or punish. And I think that makes a huge amount of difference. And then when you can articulate that, when you can actually say, look, I'm in such a state, I'm feeling frustrated, I just need to get this all out. And you're giving the person real-time explanation for the state you're in, and they can see that you're not coming at this to win anything or to punish, then I think the energy around it is completely different.
I love the way you've worded that, Maria. It absolutely resonates. And I suppose now I have more confidence, because I think often the desire to wound or have revenge is to do with hurt and vulnerability and anger and frustration.
Yes.
And if you know that underneath the surface of that behaviour of that other person, there is a person you can love, you may not like them very much at the moment, but you can love them, then that gives you that moment to vent without that sense of an agenda and a desire to hurt.
Well, I just come across I don't know if it's a quote or an essay or something somebody brought to my attention, and the person said, if you cannot love another person, like every person, if you cannot love every person, then you don't know what love is. And that really touched me. And then I went, actually, I could go a step further. If you can't love everything, then you don't know what love is, because you can't pick and choose love and bestow it on people.
That's so interesting. I'd love to take that away and think about it.
Yeah, it's really, I'm still sort of playing with that at the moment and looking at places in my life, you don't pick and choose where you love. It's not something you bestow or dispense.
And that comes from a place of being loved, I think, as well, or knowing yourself loved.
And back to the role models. What did we believe about ourselves? What did we believe about whether we were loved or are loving or lovable?
Yeah, that's so significant in terms of the platform from which we can give and the outflow.
So I'd love to hear some more, because obviously your home, your workplace is your home, and and you've used it well, and you've managed relationships, and you've watched yourself. I think that's what I really get at this, is you witnessing yourself making transformative steps, taking transformative steps. But you have taken this out into community, and there are things that you're doing, and I'd love for people to hear about that, because this is justice redesigned. And and the whole point of this is that the government can't do everything, and we can shout at the government and we can say it's all rubbish and it's all broken and whatever, and to a certain extent things aren't as good as they could be by any stretch of the imagination. But rising up and going against anybody is not the answer. So this is about the people that are doing things whether it's in their homes or in the community. But I know you've taken this out into community, and I'd love to hear
Thank you.
some of those actions that you take.
Well, I'm on the panel of mediators. We mediate pro bono for Wandsworth Mediation Service, which my husband set up 20 years ago. And I tend to do intergenerational mediations. And we've had a few golden moments. They're not always there, but one or two will keep you going for a very long time. And just briefly, because it's obviously confidential, but a mother and a son came to us, and we watched as one was quite introvert and one was quite extrovert, and we watched them start to process the problems that they'd had, and they then sent us on Mother's Day photographs of them going on an outing together. And they looked so relieved, and they were just talking about, we want to do life better. We want to reimagine our relationship now, not looking back to what we had before, not dwelling on what went wrong, but actually now the son is an adult human being, and he wants to engage with his mother and she with him in that new capacity. And we created the space for that conversation to happen.
Safe container, which is what I talk about. I mean, interesting, that reminds me of something, well, several. I mean, this is something that comes up over and over again, is, when there's a conflict and in a family, mother, daughter, father, son, or whatever, the question is, can we maintain our relationship? Just because we disagree or something, does everything have to break down? Do we have to resort to drastic measures that are just creating even more unnecessary suffering? Can we just carry on a day-to-day relationship and know that we've got this place to deal with the angsts that we're going through, supported by somebody independent and, who's got some skills and all the rest of it? And that's the greatest joy for me, is when people can do that. That just because we're at loggerheads, it doesn't mean we can't continue to love each other.
That's lovely. There's a Philippa Perry, who's married to Grayson Perry.
Oh, right, yes.
I remember one thing she said, which was, it's an awful waste of love when people don't know how to argue properly. And I think that covers what you're talking about a little bit, learning how to argue, but you've got safe spaces in which you can work that out. I think that's what you're saying, isn't it, Maria?
Yeah, that you
can carry on,
sure
you can be loving, and you don't have to work out all the things
you don't have to knock it
all the
over.
time. Yeah.
You don't have to knock everything over to be able to say, well, here are our areas where we're not in alignment. And often that's because, and I'm using this word contracting, I don't mean written down legal contracts, but that's often because we're not building proper frameworks for relationships. We hope that it's just going to magically happen.
Well, one of the things that happened with the mother and the son is we said to them, what can you safely talk about when you go out?
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah.
And what are the red boxes and the green boxes?
Yeah.
Because you need not to be entering the red boxes at the moment.
Not on your own, not unsupervised,
exactly.
Without loving support.
So they worked out what was safe to talk about and where was safe to go and what they could enjoy sharing together, and what they couldn't talk about.
Yeah, because that then helps to build the goodwill that then can enter into the spaces where we're dealing with the icky stuff.
Yes. And it gives you a confidence that you can do it as well. When you've had a couple of outings when it's gone well, that gives you a nice foundation for the next conversation, I suppose, the next outing.
Yeah, and it's amazing how quickly, there's this whole thing, hostility builds up, and there's all what we tell ourselves and the stories we're building up bigger and bigger and bigger. And so, I often find when someone's like cut someone off, for example, or they've fallen out with each other, and I say, you haven't ended any relationship because they're still taking up space here and here. They're taking up so much space, you might as well actually come and talk about it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And the story we tell ourselves in
Yeah.
our heads about someone else is it is usually almost certainly inaccurate.
Yeah, because we need a beginning, middle, and an end to everything. Because storytelling is a huge tradition in every culture in the world. I don't think there are any cultures that don't do storytelling as part of how people are together. And when we can't get the beginning, middle, and an end, we make it up. But if we've been indoctrinated in what I call domination culture, in hierarchical, punitive systems, then we're always going to fill in the gaps with the worst possible scenario rather than the best possible scenario.
I'm reminded of a friend who was taking her daughter-in-law with a very sick, very young baby to hospital. And on the way, they got a puncture. And so she was driving at about 10 miles an hour. And she was on her phone trying to phone the AA with the baby absolutely screaming in the back. And this taxi driver who's been following them for quite a while and obviously increasingly infuriated, winds down his window as he comes alongside and basically hurls abuse at her. He sees this posh, middle-aged woman on her phone going 15 miles an hour, and he tells himself a story. And he ends up with, "Get back to the counties where you belong."
Wow.
And
I've never heard that one before. I've heard variations of it.
I mean, that was the story he told himself about
Yeah,
her. And of course, if he had known what was really going on in that car and the desperation to get to the hospital and the desperation of having a flat tire and not being able to get help.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's an exercise I like to do where I draw a picture of a white van on a piece of flip chart. And I say, you've got this white van behind you. It's beeping. It's driving right up behind you. It keeps trying to overtake and get past you. What are you telling yourself? And invariably, white van man and, all these terrible things about this person, selfish and whatever. And then I draw a red cross on the side of the van and say, now what are you telling yourself? And invariably, people don't wear their intentions on their sleeves.
Brilliant idea. But I think we have a real sense of a need for fairness, don't we?
Yes.
So probably the taxi driver had a real need for fairness. I've been following this lady for however much at 10 miles an hour, and she's on. He was very angry. He wanted his fairness. He wanted to get somewhere quicker. She probably was left feeling outraged and upset and everything else with the abuse she heard him say. And this is why the conversations are so critical, aren't they? If people can just hear what's going on for someone else. And I think that's been my heart actually since that time in prison and the first DRM. It's not just mediating other people's difficult conversations, not facilitating those. It's how do we do our own personal peacemaking, I call it.
And our inner
difficult stuff.
In our inner mediating, our inner facilitation.
The stuff when I am really angry, really frustrated. How do I deal with the other person? How do I deal with myself? And that's at the heart of all of this. And this is coming back to the going to listen.
Absolutely, because we have to listen to ourselves too. And it's interesting because, that taxi driver story, there's no reason why that taxi driver couldn't. I mean, as a professional man on the road, couldn't have said, I wonder what's happening.
Yeah. But he'd never heard that way. I'm sure no one had ever told him that line before, which is why we need to have more people helping people to understand how conflict can work differently.
Absolutely. And for me, conflict is an opportunity to become our most creative. But you see, if you've only ever seen conflict as taking you to a bad place or a worse place, then it's very difficult. But it's really amazing when you can show people that conflict is inevitable. Tensions between people are going to arise. The more complicated and complex our societies get, and even within families, once upon a time, a family grew up and, you knew your neighbours and your kids married somebody that you knew and all that. But now our kids travel the world, they're exposed to all sorts of things. And, we've become dinosaurs and all of that stuff. So everything is complex and moving and fast changing. And so there are even more reasons for there to be tensions, which are inevitable. But aren't they wonderful opportunities to understand each other better?
And they really are. But I think in the world we're living in, disagreement is seen as a bad word. And it's like everybody has to agree, so we resort to our tribes.
Yeah, we go and hang out with people. I mean, you're on a subject now that for me is really important. And I think that clubs are part of the problem because, people start a club with all the best intentions, whatever it is. It could be, a hobby, it could be a political, but it could be anything. People start a club for all the best intentions. And then there's a point at which the protection of the inner sanctum becomes as important as the mission. And then it flips and the protection of the inner sanctum becomes more important than the mission. And that's where we end up with things like the post office horizon issue and Windrush and all the things where people start covering things up and cheating and lying. And then, of course, you're creating more and more unnecessary human suffering.
And I think we need to be released also from the idea that we have to agree.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We can hear and understand and listen, and somebody can feel understood by us, even if we don't agree with them. And that, I think,
I even go
is
further,
a message.
that I can empathise with where you are.
Yes, exactly.
I'm not necessarily going to join in or even contribute to where you are, but I can empathise with how you, because nobody does bad stuff, right? Because it's all about the actions, isn't it? Nobody takes an action without believing they have some mitigation, and we need to understand those mitigations, because sometimes those mitigations are false. They're false stories. They're not factual, and they're just perception that we can then adjust those perceptions, and some of them are really justified. Some of those perceptions are based in a truth or a fact.
So it's asking questions.
Yeah,
curiosity.
Yeah.
I listened. I don't actually remember the name of the man because I came in halfway through a Radio 4 interview, and he was saying the thing is that most people are actually in the middle, but the media, the press, would like us to believe that everybody's polarised. And he said, what I try and do is go and read a newspaper from an opposite political perspective from mine, or some different reading or whatever it is, every day. I try and engage myself with different opinions to my own, because I think that's really healthy.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's really important to go, what's everyone else thinking?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
What's everyone else thinking? Where the arguments come up, where the need for action comes up is when, what everyone else is thinking doesn't align, and someone then wants to take an action that is going to create injury, loss or harm. And that's the pivotal moment at which we need intervention. So for me, it isn't about being right or wrong or good or bad. It's about what is the actual or the potential for injury, loss or harm out of what I am about to do or you're about to do. There's a famous psychologist, I think he is, and he works a lot on parenting and schools, called Alfie Kohn, and I love his work. And he had this phrase that was something like, before you force your child to do their homework or eat their food or go to bed, ask yourself, is what you're about to do to force that worth the cost to the relationship?
That's a great
and
line.
If we only all asked ourselves that, is what I'm about to do worth the cost to my relationship? And of course, with children, that cost won't show up now, which will show up when they're old enough to make their own choices.
You know, my only regret is that I didn't know some of this stuff when I was younger.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
you know,
yeah.
wouldn't it have changed things? And we're still learning all the time, so I'll probably say the same thing in 10 or 20 years' time.
But then, you know, one of the things I talk about is that one gift we can give our children is demonstrating to them that, you know, conflict, there can be conflict, it can turn into disputes, we can argue and disagree, and we can come through it and get to healing. That is a really big gift.
And I think that I would say that that's happened particularly in the story that I told you earlier on. And we've had a pattern now of getting through some quite difficult conversations together, which have been very tense.
And you become practiced at it.
We do. They don't hurt any less. But we do have
you
a
trust
confidence.
The love, but you trust the love.
We definitely
That's
do.
That's the point, isn't it? You trust the love.
Yeah.
So we're kind of coming to the end of our time together, which has been really rich and beautiful, and there's a real quality of grace around you, Fiona, that I'm really just basking in, I suppose. But this series is about justice redesigned. And so I have a final question for you. And, you know, it could be in any area of life, but if I were to give you the keys to the ministry of justice today and say, you know, in the next few days, you can make one change, what change would you make?
I would love to see an alternative to incarceration, which very rarely benefits people.
Yeah.
I've seen a few people in the prison who you just think, what a waste that they're here when you could do so many different things for them.
Yeah. And they could do many things to help themselves and others around them.
Exactly. And it would allow those bits in them, the creative bits in them, to flourish if you could support that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, I wouldn't do away with prison altogether, or the idea, because I do believe that society, you know, basic requirement is safety. And if a community don't feel safe with someone around, and there's evidence to support that, not just I decided, you know, I think it is important that we remove some people for a period of time. But it's what we do when we do that, you know. As far as I'm concerned, we're just throwing money away.
So it's looking at the programs within the prison and some alternative prisons for the people who may not benefit anyone, even society, to have them inside.
So when I was doing some work out in New York, the district attorney out on Long Island, they had an alternative to incarceration program, and they could, you know, if they took a certain person, and they could go to the court and say, like, we want to recommend this person goes to the program. And it was a rehabilitation program where the person would have to sort of redesign themselves, redesign their position in the community, and then give back to the community as well. But all from a facilitated and loving place. And what was interesting was my role was bringing the conflict resolution bit, because, you know, wherever you put people together, people are going to argue and start fights with each other. And that was a really beautiful process to see how some of those people 10 years later have flourished. You know, one person is running a halfway house. One person's working for the district attorney's office. You know, they've all gone on, you know, lots of them have gone on to do really worthwhile things, which is amazing.
And you're allowing people to take responsibility for their own decisions and their own lives. And that sounds incredibly hopeful.
Yeah, really. There was, before I even got there, they'd done a whole restorative program where they went to the community and said, you know, we've got video evidence on these, you know, 16 drug dealers, and we can shove them in prison tomorrow. But we've done that for the last 20 years and it hasn't changed anything. Someone just comes and fills. And the community said, we want to talk to them. And they arranged a community to meet these people and said, we're claiming our streets back with or without you, but we'd rather do it with you.
How
And
can
it
we
was-
do that here?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I would love to talk to the powers that be. I mean,
Well, Maria, if anyone's going to do it, you could.
oh well, let's see where that takes me. But this has been a wonderful time together. Thank you for that deep sharing and for our loving connection.
Well, thank you, Maria, for inviting me. It's a real privilege.
Thank you.